Hello everybody, welcome back to the Premier Injuries channel. Today we thought we'd go live and we thought we'd do an injury update immediately because of the Mitrovic situation, but there's a few other kind of stories coming out at the moment. Ben, I mean, you're looking ready, you're looking up for it. Are you quite happy as well before we get on to the injuries? 4-1 for your boys. I mean, that was a great win, wasn't it?
Can he win? I will take those 3 points. Truth be told, I would have maybe taken the point before kick-off today. Fulham have been on a great run. Newcastle have maybe played a little bit better than results suggest, but like I say, with too many draws in there. The sending off, it gives us a big helping hand without a shadow of a doubt. But look, Callum Wilson back on the score sheet. We were missing a few key players. Bruno obviously came through. Had concerns when Joe Linton was benched. Matty Targett was benched. Those were both, I wouldn't say they were enforced, but there were certainly tactical decisions from Eddie Howe. Joe Linton picked up a knee injury during that 1-1 draw with Bournemouth. Hadn't trained a lot. Had a fitness test down at Craven Cottage before the match. Eddie Howe done right, decided they're on the side of caution and not risk him. Had been toying with the Sven Botman stroke Dan Burn conundrum all week. I needn't have worried. Matty Targett had been struggling with illness, didn't have a lot of training in his legs, so that's why he started on the bench as well.
Good insights there. And I guess the other question for you, Ben, is the Callum Wilson. He was risked today. Do you think he's kind of come through that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he came off. He cuts a bit of a frustrated figure, but the guy's a winner. They're winning 4-0. He wants to score goals. In his own mind, he will still want to be on that plane to Qatar at the World Cup in the winter. Look, there isn't much room now for any slip-ups. He certainly can't afford any setback of any kind. On form, you would argue, is there a better striker out there other than Harry Kane? I know they'll talk about the likes of Tony and so on and so forth, but just for what Callum Wilson brings, his goals per minute ratio is fantastic. It's just whether you can actually trust him to stay fit. And when you're going to a tournament in that World Cup and it's, the games are coming thick and fast, you can't really afford to have any passengers. But as an impact player who could potentially come off the bench, grab your goal, he brings something different. He certainly knows where the goal is. And look, this is going to be a big period of games for him between now and sort of, mid-November.
So let's get into the other big striker news there from that game, Newcastle versus Fulham. It's Mitrovic. A lot of people, there's already been a couple of questions about him. Joey Kneecap says, Mitrovic is what we all want to know about. And Slavcho has said, I'd say the template took a big hit today. Will Mitrovic be back soon? So what's the kind of latest on there? And just before we get into it, I just want to tell everybody what we've got up on screen is the Premier Injuries table. So if you have any kind of queries or worries about injuries, that's the first place to head over to, and then you can always tweet us, comment, any questions there, but we're very quick on updating that. And as you can see, we've kind of done Mitrovic already. He's there on screen. What's the latest on that ankle injury?
Jason, I'm a little bit loath to give this update because as soon as I do, everybody might switch off. He's the one that everybody does want to know about. And of course, there were concerns or doubts heading into this game against Newcastle, his former employers. Of course, he wanted to be involved, but he did pick up 2 knocks while playing for Serbia. The first one, he was forced off following that goal where he got his hat-trick. And then he was seen travelling to Norway, scored again in the Nations League, been bagging form, but was spotted limping heavily post-match. That right ankle was strapped and iced. So that called into question, his availability. Marco Silva hinted or suggested that Mitrovic would feature. To what extent we didn't know. And I dare say, given the fact that he's a beast, he's a bit of a warrior. He was prepared to put everything on the line because it was Newcastle, because of the form what he's in. But he takes another knock on that ankle. Now, one, you want to hope that it hasn't been exacerbated, and there's not too much sort of further damage in and around there. If it's impact and if it's just a kick and it comes down to pain management, then certainly we'll stand a good chance of him recovering for game week 10. We have heard from Marco Silva, as always, and it's always difficult in that immediate aftermath of the game, and particularly after suffering a heavy 4-1 defeat. They don't want to really talk about things. They don't like to speculate. But he said it's too early to say, and the striker will be assessed over the next 24 to 48 hours. But like I say, if it's just impact, like we've seen on those 2 games for Serbia, then, these sort of next 5-6 days, if he responds really well to treatment, then I can see Mitrovic back in that matchday squad in game week 10.
Yeah, and just to remind people that we'll be keeping updates on that through the week. If we do have confirmation of an injury, or like Ben said, maybe it might just be a knock, we'll kind of give an insight video just dedicated on that, because people like to know the return to play kind of data on that. Dusan has asked the question, will Mitrovic play the World Cup? I think it's too early to kind of say that, isn't it, Ben? It's just, we've seen an injury today. He's come off early, and we just kind of got to process the information at the moment.
Yeah, what I would say first and foremost is you cannot necessarily take too much on face value, particularly when it comes to a player like Mitrovic, who, like you say, is a bit of a hardened warrior, if the truth be told. So, the fact that he has been forced off, that's an indication that it's a little bit of a sore one. But look, if we're looking for a bit of a silver lining, if we're thinking it's along the lines of those similar types of problems that forced him off for Serbia, then again, with a little bit of rest, a little bit of recovery, then, he should be back in contention. You just need to keep your fingers crossed that, like I say, that issue hasn't been exacerbated too much.
And we talked about Callum Wilson at the start. You said he's come through that quite well. But the problem with Callum Wilson has always been his history of injuries, especially hamstring ones, high risk of recurrence there. What's Mitrovic injury history like? Would that give you confidence if there was any sort of problems that he could probably return pretty quickly anyway?
Yeah, fairly robust. Like I say, he's not the concern is he's not a player that goes off, with the slightest touch. So that tells you something about, how sore that ankle was today. And you factor in that it was Newcastle United, and he wanted to, he would have been wanting to go out there and prove himself and, continue this hot streak in front of goal. So, that's a slight concern. He's a massive player for Fulham. Marco Silva suggested, going into the game, that they had a lot of injury issues. And today, they've come out of that in a slightly worse case scenario. So, this will hit them hard. It's not just the loss of Mitrovic, like I say. The wider context is it's a big defeat, and also other players as well who missed out. The likes of the Willian, the Tetes who had picked up a knock. Robertson wasn't quite fit. A couple of questions that have been asked with regards to Harry Wilson. Of course, he hasn't featured at all this season, and not a great deal mentioned about the Fulham midfielder. I'm led to believe that he's probably around about maybe 14 to 21 days away from joining the team in training, and then it'll be a case of working his way back up to fitness. So potentially, maybe before the end of October, or certainly before the World Cup, we could see Harry Wilson back in contention for Fulham.
Yeah, so another question that we have got from one of the people tuning in, Hadi Diallo, has asked, Saint-Maximin keep or sell? So what is the kind of likelihood there that he's going to be back in the team soon, Ben?
Yeah, look, if you've kept Maxi for this long, then it makes sense. He is on the cusp of a return, so it makes sense just to hold out. It was a judgment call, again, a 50-50 call on whether he's going to be involved at Fulham this weekend. Following a setback, probably the right decision. Well, it is. We won first and foremost, and he hasn't been risked. Get those additional sessions on the training pitches, get Maxi working with the team, but certainly game week 10, a place on the bench is more than realistic. And to be honest, that's what I'm fully expecting. But once you've had a re-injury or recurrence, you need to be really, really careful. So again, while there are no guarantees at this stage, I would say I'm fairly confident.
Would you say with the fact that he has been re-injured as well, kind of stop, start, is there a risk of kind of deconditioning? So it'll take him maybe a little while to get back up to speed. So he'll be back not injured, but it's kind of that match sharpness, that ability that he has to kind of take people on.
Yeah, what I would say about players like Maxi, what we know, he's very explosive. He's a guy that likes to go through the gears. He attacks. He's up and down that pitch. So he is reliant a lot on that sharp, those quick bursts of speed, quick changes in direction. And of course, yeah, there might be a little bit of rustiness there in terms of, when he comes back, whether it's probably going to be in and around that 6-week period. So, no amount of training on the training pitches can, substitute for, the cut and thrust of the Premier League. So it's going to take him a game or two to get back up to where he was pre-injury levels. But he's a guy, like I say, he does tend to take a lot of knocks just because of the style of player that he is. But, he'll be back in there, and I'm sure he'll be performing for Newcastle sooner rather than later.
So, I mean, Ben, do you want to take the topic of conversation on to anybody else? I mean, there's a few discussion points, as somebody said in the chat. The what we call the template has taken a little bit of a hit today. Do you want to switch over to another team that's kind of had injury problems that we should be aware about?
Well, why don't we kick off at the North London derby? That means your opportunity, maybe, if you want to say anything as an Arsenal supporter, Jake, because I'm sure you're very happy with that 3-1 win.
Oh, I wouldn't like to rub it in at all,
Yeah.
No, it was a good match to watch. There was a lot of hairy moments. So what I would say from my analysis perspective was Conte, I would say, actually got the tactics right on the day. It was a couple of kind of moments of madness. The goalkeeper spilling it. Lloris very rarely does that. Arsenal did play well, but Tottenham countered it quite well as well. And if Son had been on more form, or maybe if Kulu was on instead of Richarlison, they could have scored on those counter-attacks, which is where we got caught out kind of last season when we went to the Tottenham Stadium. Whereas this time around, we were a little bit lucky. So I think it was a good performance, but at the same time, I think we showed that at times we can be weak from those counter-attacking teams, because we love to press, we love to play high up the pitch. Ben White playing in that right-back position, I think he was exposed at times, especially from the speed of Son. Gabriel had a few mistakes in him, especially that first goal, should have cleared it more easily. But I'll take the positives of the win, but at times, somebody like Manchester City would probably put those opportunities away, whereas Tottenham didn't. I don't know if you had any feelings on the game as well.
Yeah, pretty much, along those lines. I'm just not getting the big buy-in with Ben White. I think he's disappointing for me, particularly on that right back role. I would like to see Tomiyasu occupy that right back slot, particularly now he's back up to full speed. I think he gives you more defensively and also a little bit further up the pitch. And I know people rave on about Zinchenko as well, but I'm a big fan of Kieran Tierney. And I think defensively, he brings more to that Arsenal backline. But look, you got the win. Let's not take anything away from that. You did touch upon one or two things from Antonio Conte. One in terms of his setup, and that relates to his team selection today. And we talked about some of the absences. Now, Kulusevski was one of those players that you said potentially, could have come on and helped change the game, or certainly get Tottenham back into it. He was absent today after picking up an injury while on international duty. That's a muscular problem. That's hamstring related, the full extent of which we're waiting to learn to understand. He will be sent for another MRI scan. So again, that's not a good indication at this stage. It suggests that there's maybe a little bit more going on than initially thought, certainly in terms of its severity. So, even if we're looking at something fairly minor, we could be talking about 2 to 3 weeks on the sidelines with that one. And another concern, and I know he hasn't featured a lot, but Lucas Moura, that's an Achilles problem. Now, Antonio Conte, he did begin training before the international break, and it was anticipated that he'd return in game week 9. So that was the plan all along. But this Achilles problem has flared up again, and Antonio Conte admits that he is worried now that Achilles isn't responding as it should, and this is getting dragged on, longer than he would have wished. So there is no, I suppose, clear defined return to play timeline for Lucas Moura, which is like I say, is just a little bit of a concern. He's not one of those players that you would necessarily, start in the Premier League week in and week out, but he's a player that can help to ease that burden in terms of managing minutes amongst those forwards and sharing them out. I think it was 13 games in 43 days. Now it's a very busy period, so that, clubs and squads are going to be stretched. So that's one to watch out for. Lots and lots of injury updates today to go through. I'll try and sort of cherry pick some of those big, high profile, high status injuries that I've had a lot of questions about. Crystal Palace, Joachim Andersen, nothing flagged by Patrick Vieira during Friday's press conference. Joachim Andersen actually complained of a little bit discomfort in his calf after training on Friday morning. Ultimately, again, he failed a fitness test, so that's why he was absent from the matchday squad. That afforded a little bit of a defensive reshuffle. We've seen Nathaniel Klein move to right back and Joel Ward sitting at centre back, and it was Nathaniel Klein who unfortunately picked up a nasty looking ankle problem, went up, landed awkwardly, rolled that ankle and was stretchered off. Now, as it currently stands at the time of recording, Nathaniel Klein is actually in hospital having that assessed. So fingers crossed, and we wish him all of the best. Hopefully that's not too serious. But like I say, once you see stretchers involved and players being, whisked off to hospital, then unfortunately you fear the worst. On the plus side, we did see James Tompkins back in the matchday squad for Palace. That's the first time this season. He returned after a long-term calf problem, so he was able to come in then at centre back with Joel Ward, then moving back out to the wing. Having a little look through my list, the current game that's on, we got in the middle, it's half time, just checking. Diego Costa's warming up there. But we had Pedro Neto forced off an early challenge in and around that 24th minute mark. Went down, tried to come on. Unfortunately, it was no good. Maxwell Cornet, again, he was coming, I think it was his first Premier League start. 3 changes there by David Moyes. Couldn't last past that 34th minute. It looked a bit of an innocuous challenge coming together. Don't recall who with, but seemed to suggest that it was maybe an ankle or a left foot problem. Knew straight away that there was a bigger issue into play. And as he was coming off, he pointed to his left calf. Now, again, if that's a muscular-related problem, then, we're not talking a quick turnaround here. We could be talking, potentially weeks, which again isn't good because West Ham, it's an area of the pitch where they're not necessarily blessed with a lot of players, particularly when you consider they've got European football as well to fit in around this busy fixture schedule. For where do we go? We'll stay in London with Fulham, and I mentioned, we talked about Mitrovic, but they had problems today with Willian. That was a muscle problem as well. Done really well in his first start. I think it was Nottingham Forest back in game week 8. So we were looking forward to seeing him back. But unfortunately, that muscle problem kept him out. No news from Marco Silva with regards to any potential return for that. That's a niggling problem. Tete was also out of the game. No real news. And there was a couple of players who are involved in and around that squad who were included but weren't 100% fit. Players that we did expect potentially to return this weekend who didn't. We've seen Kepa in goal for Chelsea. Edward Mendy, he has been on the training pitches, but that ongoing knee problem means that he just hasn't had enough training in those legs, and hopefully game week 10 is a possibility. The same with N'Golo Kante, hoping to join the group early next week. That might put him in contention for the Champions League, if not game week 10. And Mark Cucurella, He went down. There's a lot of sickness. There's a lot of bugs going around at the moment. He was actually I would not hospitalized, but he did pay a hospital visit due to a problem with his throat. Again, nothing too serious. Maybe the Champions League comes a little bit too soon midweek, but game week 10 is realistic as long as he can get some minutes on the training pitches. Who else have we got? Pontus Jansson, Brentford. Disappointing result for me, as I went for my left field captaincy pick, and I ignored Haaland. I ignored Kane, and of course I went Ivan Toney.
Yeah.
Look, it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. Nils each draw, and again that disappointing result was probably capped off. We've seen Christoph, I think it was Aya, went off around about that hour mark. Just a couple of minutes later, Pontus Jansson pulls up with a hamstring strain. That doesn't look great. But on the flip side, Thomas Frank has spoken about the return to fitness of Ethan Pinnock. So he is on the cusp of breaking back into that first team squad. And he is an option should the Bees need to utilise him with that injury to Janssen going forward.
Just going to interrupt you there, Ben. Kaftan has asked a question for us. Mitrovic to Wilson as a transfer. I like it. I mean, I think I've written about, I've kind of researched over the last few weeks that Newcastle are around one of the best attacks in the league at the moment. But the problem has been, Wilson being injured, Isaac coming into the team. There's lots of injury issues that have kind of disrupted them. But they sit fifth for shots in the box, fifth for XG so far this season. So they're creating a lot of high quality chances for whoever is leading the line, and Wilson there. Whereas Fulham, they're good, but can they kind of keep it up? I think Newcastle are a better team. They've got a really nice run of fixtures in the game weeks ahead. And I wasn't surprised how well they played against Fulham. I thought, even with some of those injuries, Newcastle are just a better side. Now, I think the next coming few weeks, you'll kind of see the Magpies push on a little bit. Whereas Fulham, if Mitrovic is injured as well, there could be issues with even goal scoring at all because they're so reliant on him. So I like that switch. I think that could be a good template buster. But, it's hard to ignore how good Mitrovic has been. I was very sceptical at the start of the season if he would be able to do it again this season. Will he, won't he, has been the perennial question with him in the Premier League. So I don't know. I think, would you say it's a brave man to bet against Mitrovic, Ben, or would you be happy to make that decision?
I mean, I've already backed Wilson this season ahead of Mitrovic, and had no qualms in doing so. Wilson's got something. He has a target in his sights. He's got something to aim for in that World Cup in Qatar. So rest assured, Wilson will be giving his all for Newcastle. That will only benefit the club and benefit those who want to back him, in FPL. If he gets injured, if he suffers a setback, easy player to move on. That's not a problem. Like I did myself with that last injury. I am a little bit reticent or reluctant to jump on like Wilson again today, given the fact that he on his first game back. And I'm going to say it's not a concern, it's an issue. And this is maybe something to think about when Alexander Isak returns to full fitness. How Newcastle's set up. That's an issue for Eddie Howe. Like I say, predominantly we went 4-3-3 all season, with Almiron and Wilson centrally, and on the left you would have somebody like Maxi in there, or Ryan Fraser or Jacob Murphy. Now, with Maxi approaching full fitness, Isak might only be 10, 14 days away. Wilson's obviously back. Almiron, unlucky not to get a hat-trick today. There's a lot of players vying for those positions in that starting 11, and you might think that Eddie Howe will want to protect Callum Wilson. Yes, he'll get the starts, but if Newcastle are in doing okay, a 2-0 up, he may look to protect him like he did today. So that's the only thing. But for the here and now, while all of those players are still working their way back to fitness, then look, I think if you're having a Callum Wilson that is still managing to bang the goals when he isn't 100% back to full match fitness, then you can only, you'll salivate at what he's producing, when he is up and running with a Newcastle team who are brimming with confidence.
I think the thing is maybe the two of them could be played in tandem, but the weird thing is they play quite similarly. Apart from Wilson is better at the hold up play, but again that could benefit Isaac. If Wilson's holding up the ball, that ability to then play it through to Isaac, it could be a nice deadly duo up top. Be interesting to see, like you said, how controls the situation. But let's see what happens. If there's any final questions, we're just about to wrap up, but I think we've covered it all, haven't we, Ben? The kind of latest injury information. And if there's any more tomorrow, we'll probably cover that Monday. We like to keep Sundays as family days, don't we, Ben?
The wife likes to keep it as a family day, so I'm under strict instructions. Unless there is some kind of monumental injury setback, then pretty much things are locked down. And I must admit, it is the little one's birthday party on Sunday, so I will be 10-pin bowling at some point during the afternoon while the games are on, unfortunately.
Okay, we're going to have one last question then. From Slavcho. He said, what do you think Arteta and his team changed in Arsenal to avoid serious injuries? A few years back, Arsenal was in a really bad shape, and now players like Jesus look invincible. I think it's a good question. We've kind of discussed this before. What are your thoughts and feelings on this, Ben?
Yeah, look, it's always, you always need to contextualise as well. And there's so many influencing factors here when it comes to injury incidents. It's just, you cannot put your finger down to one specific thing. Historically, yes, Arsenal have always featured fairly highly in terms of the number of injuries that they suffered. Their burden is quite high. And there's a multitude of factors in and around that. First and foremost, if you want to go back to the Jack Wilshere, the Abu Dhabi, even the Aaron Ramsey days, and that's a West Ham goal, by the way, 2-0.
Goodness me.
And it's Jared Bowen who scored. So Bowen's back. Is it a good? I'm going to watch this goal. But yeah, so into the expectation is to have a player that it's unrealistic if you have a player like Wilshere who only played maybe 50% of league games to all of a sudden then play 70, 80, 90% of games. That just ain't going to happen. Historically, is the number of injuries that a player has suffered in the past is a fairly good indication about how they're going to do in the future. Secondly, you talk about squad strength and depth, and maybe on occasion, certainly under Arsene Wenger, you had this maybe squad that was stretched because of injury. You had players who ordinarily, you wouldn't want to play or utilize, but the pressures and the demands of the job, the demands of the stakeholders mean that you're maybe more likely to take risks, use players who are in that red zone, and it becomes this vicious circle where players are going out there, they're suffering setbacks, your squad's stretched, you're pushing players, you're returning them early, so you had that cycle, and it's hard to get out. And then ultimately that takes time to change all of that, and it goes back to from everybody within the whole club, and it's not just the backroom staff, but it's also the players as well. They need to take responsibility. They only spend a very small percentage of time actually in and around the club. What they do away from that in terms of how they look after themselves, diet, nutrition, post-match recovery, pre-match routines, sleep, all of those things can impact on, a player's potential health, fitness, well-being, decision-making, so it's about looking after yourself both on and off the pitch. And I think, like I said, now they're hoping that they're certainly moving in the right direction. But, they're still not without the problems. We've seen Tomiyasu in recent times, a lot of problems. Kieran Tierney, Thomas Partey, So look, it's about managing those. It's about having players, having that strength and depth and having players who can come in and replace them. And like I say, ease that pressure, ease that burden, and making the job easy for Mikel Arteta.
Yeah, I think pretty much you've covered it all there, Ben. It's the kind of squad depth. We've got players that we can dip into now. I think the type of profile of players that we got as well, the fact that we're one of the youngest squads in the Premier League, younger players, they're going to grow into it, but also they don't have those injury histories attached to them. So, yeah, it will be exciting to see how it goes as well, because like I said, we've got one of the youngest squad. We're only going to get better over the next coming few seasons, and if we can keep the likes of Saliba, whoever is kind of the big 11 in our team, if we can not sell them like in previous years as well. I think that was one of the other things, during the Wenger years, was we'd have somebody exceptional or playing really well, and then we'd lose them to the nearest rivals, things like that. So at least we've got that ability now to squad build because we're not losing people. But yeah, I hope Slavcho says thanks to that, Ben. So I think you've given a fantastic answer, and I think we've covered most of the important injury news for the time being. If you do have questions, you can tweet Ben, you can message us through our YouTube channel, you can leave comments below, and we will try and answer them as quickly as possible. But for now, we're going to wish you the best of luck. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we will be back probably Monday, unless